Hey friend, Chris Vandeviver here from WhyLogicProRules.com, the website that helps you get the most you can out of Apple's Logic Pro 10. Today I want to walk you through what led me to kind of give up on MIDI controllers and just get an iPad at the end of the day to use with Logic Pro 10. Now, I don't think it's any secret to anybody that Logic has a complementary application for iPad and iPhone called Logic Remote. And it's supposed to work right with Logic. You know, you're able to play instruments and use the mixer, etc. And to be honest, I was pretty apprehensive about this. Not because I thought it was a bad app or anything, just, I don't know, the idea of using an iPad as a controller never was something that I found alluring. I grew up with laptops and desktop computers, and I don't know, I just kind of had this apprehension. I didn't want to get involved. So I was going through all sorts of MIDI controllers, trying to find that one MIDI controller that just tightly integrates with Logic Pro 10. And to be honest, I never quite found that solution, which led me to eventually get an iPad and ultimately very happy with. So I want to walk you through how awesome Logic Remote actually is for the iPad and iPhone. But let's just quickly take a look at my small journey of testing out different controllers. Now, to start with, I had very simple controllers like the one right here, the Nectar Impact. This guy is great. It's a, relatively big MIDI controller, and that's all it is. It's a glorified Nintendo controller for playing sounds in Logic. And it does the job. You have some transport functionality here. You can hit play, you can hit record, you can go up and down the octaves. Does exactly what it's supposed to. But I always was desiring something that just tightly synced up with Logic, where I wanted to be able to adjust levels and faders. In addition to looking for a keyboard that tightly integrates with Logic, I've started looking at different control surfaces as something that maybe I wanted to use. I've only ever used a mouse and the Mac keyboard, so maybe I would like to have some faders, be able to mute and solo multiple tracks at a time. So I gave that a try, and I got the PreSonus fader port. And at first it was pretty cool. It was the 8-slider one. And I was like, yeah, this is cool. It makes me feel like $1 million having this control surface sitting on my desk. Over time, though, I learned two things. Number one, I never quite reached for it. I just never got myself acclimated to that workflow. Just found it so much easier to use a mouse, And then I also found over time, and this is just my experience, maybe it's not your experience if you own the Fader Port 8, but I found over time that as Logic updated and the firmware updated on the unit itself, there was some sort of breakdown between the Fader Port and Logic Pro 10 because after a year of owning it, the thing never worked correctly with Logic. It went from pretty good to abysmal. No matter what slider I adjusted, no matter what button I pressed, none of it worked as it should. And I contacted PreSonus numerous times, customer support, fantastic, but ultimately it was just all right, wait for a firmware update. We're going to try to fix it. And each firmware update just got worse and worse. So I sold it. So not disparaging PreSonus. I think they're a great company doing cool things. Just didn't work out for me. So I'm in this journey of trying to find a keyboard that tightly integrates with Logic and a control surface. And I'm exploring my options like right here. I also got into the PreSonus Atom, which I think is a cool controller. It's a drum pad, has various functions. And as a drum pad, as a basic controller, pretty awesome. But you don't get that tight integration like you would with Studio One. You don't get different multicolored blocks. They're all about the same, and all the extra functions don't work well with Logic itself. That was a bit of a bummer. I was kind of anticipating some sort of evolution of the Atom controller. I saw that it evolved for Ableton, but not with Logic. Sort of a bummer. After that, I started getting into the Native Instruments controllers, and I have two actually. I have an S-Series controller, which is huge. It's right over here. And it has a light guide for what keys you can play, and it has two screens for what you're controlling. It's pretty awesome. And using it with Complete Control and Native Instruments software, it's amazing. You can flip through different presets and sample them and choose them, and it's awesome. But again, with Logic Pro 10, it doesn't really integrate. It works really well. It has transport. You can program different MIDI knobs to do different functions, but I'm just looking for something that just, you plug it in, you go. And I think that Native Instruments is really missing an opportunity here. That's what I see with a lot of different manufacturers, is that they have an opportunity and they just don't take it. And I think in the case of Native Instruments, they're just really hell-bent on getting us into complete control in Native Instruments, trying to get us into their world instead of adapting to our world. But, I love that controller. It's cool. It's just a little too big for what I can do. I play one finger at a time. That's about it. So the different knobs work really well. There is a mixer mode where you can adjust the knobs to adjust levels and panning. You can mute and solo. It's pretty cool. And then I got the Complete Control M series keyboard. And I'll just bring it up real quick. This thing is sick. It's 32 keys, which is actually pretty awesome because usually a controller of this size is about 24 keys, which I always find that you need just like a little more. 24 keys is never enough. It's always like a little outside of the range of what you need. So 32 is pretty slick. It has transport controls and different options. Again, it integrates with Complete Control really well. And it has these different knobs for adjusting controls in Logic as well. So adjusting the faders, the panning. And you have this little OLED screen that you can't quite see, but it lights up. And, it's pretty slick. I have to say, additionally, with the S-Series controller. But the thing that I find with all these different controllers, especially the fader port, etc., is that I never know quite what I'm affecting on screen. I always have to kind of like look at the screen and look back down to the controller and, you press the knob and it tells you in the OLED what you're touching. And it's always kind of like this dance of trying to figure out what are you controlling exactly. I just never got completely comfortable with these devices, which forced me to eventually say, you know what? I'll just buy an iPad. Let's just check it out. 7th generation, nothing special, not the Pro. It's just your basic iPad, the cheapest one I could get. And I gotta say, Logic Remote, we're gonna actually dive into this in a screen capture, but I want to start out just by demonstrating all these different tools that I've bought. I haven't bought all the things. I've just bought a number of things and tested them out to find where that sweet spot is for Logic users. And again, I was very, very apprehensive about buying an iPad. I don't know. It's like I have an iPhone. I have a lot of different Apple devices, but something about the iPad I was very apprehensive about. Like, don't take away my keyboard and mouse. But it's pretty freaking slick. I gotta say, I think hands down, Logic Remote for the iPad or iPhone is the best, hands down best control surface for Logic users. So let's dig into this right now. Cool, so let's dig into Logic Remote for the iPad. I have a short little riff that I put together, and if we look at the iPad screen, we can see that I have the mixer called up. But there are several different views for you to choose from using Logic Remote. To start with, let's go to the disclosure triangle in the upper left-hand corner. And if I click on it, we can see that I have smart controls and keyboard, chord strips, live loops, mixer, key commands, and smart help. And if I cycle through the different track types, some of these options will change. So check it out. We have smart controls and drum pads itself. And it's pretty amazing what you can accomplish using your iPad as a controller. To start with, let's just take a quick listen to this riff that I have here. And I'm just going to hit play on the iPad itself. And I can even adjust the different faders on the iPad, and not just one at a time. I can actually adjust multiple at a time. So let's check it out. And we even have different views of the mixer itself. So check it out. We have pan and volume, but if I just want volume, amazing. All of a sudden we have huge throw on the faders. And by throw, I mean if I drag the fader way down or way up, check it out. So there's so much resolution on the iPad, and I'm just, bringing it up and down with my finger. Double click to set it back to its original state. On top of that, we have different sends that we can apply, different audio effects. We can adjust the I/O right within the app itself and even introduce MIDI effects. And so there's so much versatility just within the mixer itself. It's pretty fantastic. If I open the audio effects, I can open an EQ, for example. So let's click on it and open the plugin, and bam, we now have a fully adjustable EQ right on screen. That is amazing. That blows my mind. Now, I will say that most of the plugins do not have this sort of resolution to work with. If I open up Pedalboard and we open the plugin, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see a whole lot of sliders and not much graphical functionality. I do hope this changes in the near future, but I'm just happy to adjust faders and panning and be able to move around the mixer in a very natural and intuitive way. Check it out. Let's just hit play and I'll just, kind of slide around. We can even control automation, so we can set the automation mode to various modes and then adjust the fader. It's pretty fantastic. And then the I/O, let me just create a new track. So create a new audio track and I'll set it to input 2 just so we don't have any craziness. Now we can see here, I have the Apogee Ensemble and I can make adjustments to the I/O right from within here. So I could actually go in and select a different input. So input 4, let's say, and I can even adjust it to be one of these different options. So I have an instrument input, or I can switch it to something more line level, set it to mic. We can even introduce a high pass filter. These are all the audio device controls that I've covered in some of my Apogee Element videos. We also have some control room type of functionality. It's everything within the mixer on screen in Logic on your Mac, but you can hit mute on the stereo output. You can dim the stereo output. You can even adjust the fader, though I never touch it personally. You can recall solo or clear solo. We can also mute and then reset mute. But let's start digging into some of the instruments. So right now in the mixer, we essentially have a control surface for adjusting faders, for soloing, for muting, for adjusting panning. It's wonderful to use, and it's nice to be able to look at the iPad and know exactly what you're adjusting and not a tiny little OLED screen that doesn't really sync up all the time with Logic. So let's move on. I'm going to go into some of these other views and I'm going to set up smart controls. So we don't have any plugins on this channel, but if I move up to the Chop Piano, booyah, we have smart controls. So let's open smart controls on my Mac. Essentially the exact same thing, but we have a keyboard that we can adjust the resolution of. So we can set the keys very fat. For me, this works really well, but you can also set it as narrow as you need it to be, which I did quite a bit. And then we can also adjust the smart controls on screen. So adjust the drive. I already have some of these effects already on the plugin, but it's amazing. And on top of that, we have different modes to play on the iPad as well. So we have glissando here. Let me switch it to scroll so we can actually scroll up and down the keys if you don't feel like pressing the octave button. So I'm scrolling, but I can also hop up and down the octaves using this octave section right in the left-hand side, or we can play pitch. So I don't have an instrument that adjusts in pitch necessarily, but you can see there's a little blue dot that goes up and down. Let's check out a new software instrument, maybe Alchemy. Switch it up, and let's just see if some of this works with the pitch. So I'm going to switch the mode again to pitch. So it's affecting some sort of modulation. I think it's pretty cool. We're able to adjust the modulation or the pitch of the note just by sliding up and down on the note. Additionally, you can adjust the scale of the performance as well. So if you want to set like a major blues or a natural minor, you can do that. Take a look. And now we have that scale just on white keys here. And if you go up to the gear here, we can actually adjust the signature as well and the tempo and the key signature. So let's set it to D. You can see that C3 just changed to D3. Everything in that scale is now laid out and adjusts for that scale. We don't have every single whole and half step going up the keyboard. We have just the keys of this scale. It's pretty sick. And then we also have an arpeggiator as well. That is sick. So if we switch it up here, go back to off. We also have a sustain section here as well that we can turn on and off. Let's move into some of the other territories here. We have chord strips, so we can play chords based on the scale that we've set. And we also have bass notes that are the darker notes below. And you can play each key independent from one another. So it's like playing a keyboard, just in a different way of interacting with it. And again, if you go up to the gear here, you can make adjustments to the chords. So you can actually adjust the custom chords. So instead of C sharp here, we can switch it to C. Or if we select some of the other chord strips, we can adjust for the key that we want to work with. So D, cool. And we're all done. And you can even, let's head back to the mixer here. And if we drag down from the top here, you can actually slide along the timeline. You just pull from like the LED here, up and down. You can slide along, set it up here, turn off the cycle mode. Very slick. Let's move into the key command section here. And just like any key command within Logic, instead of remembering the key, you can actually scroll through different pages of options of key commands. And we also have transport at the bottom here. So we can play, we can hit stop, we can move forward or backwards, cycle mode on and off. We can create a marker. There's so much versatility here, and you know exactly what you're working with. There's a lot to be said for the tactile experience of an actual controller, but for me, I want to reduce any sort of friction for creating in Logic Pro 10. I don't want to have friction. I don't want to be second guessing myself and second guessing what I'm doing. I want to know exactly what I'm working with so I can get to work. Now let's scroll down here to my drum tracks, and we'll see that we now have smart controls and drum pads. And check this out. We have 12 different drum pads that we can play here, and we have the smart controls from Drum Machine Designer. You know, you can adjust the compressor. But if you're looking for the entirety of the Drum Machine Designer that you're working with, click up here again and just select drum pads. So instead of having smart controls taking up half of the screen, all of our drum pads across the whole kit. And if you move up and down the octaves, you can see more of the pads. I will say that I wish some of the icons that are included in Drum Machine Designer, I wish that they were applied to the pads in Logic Remote, just because it's easier to identify than reading a bunch of text, you know? If we open up Drum Machine Designer here, we can see all the different icons plus the name. That's really helpful. So I hope that a future update will introduce that. But on top of this, we can also introduce note repeat right within Logic Remote. So we can do 16th notes. And we can also do spot erase. So if you messed up, you can erase some notes just by holding the pad and letting the track play through. But this isn't just for drum machines. If we take a look, and let's just select one of the drum kits from within Logic here, select Blue Ridge, like that. On screen, we have an actual drum kit that we can play, which is incredible because this might be something that a lot of us are more used to. You're using your fingers still, but I love how the instruments adapt to the type of instrument you're working with. In fact, let's just kind of backtrack here and let me introduce a bass track. So empty channel strip, create, go to bass here, fingerstyle bass, and look at that. We have a bass neck. And if we switch right over here, smart controls and fretboard, it's just incredible. I love it. And again, we can adjust the scale right over here. Now, the last piece that I want to show you is the live loop section, which is pretty incredible for being able to play ideas that you have in a non-linear fashion. So let me just switch the view here. So we're in the live loop section, and let's play a scene. Which is so cool. I can play one loop at a time just by pressing different loops. So a lot of opportunity for live performance or testing out ideas right from the iPad screen. And we can even introduce the effects as well. So those remix effects that came with Logic 10.5, you can apply this on the fly on a nice screen. There's no controller I know of that can do all of this stuff. Check it out. Let's just play this one scene. There's literally no controller I know that can do all of this stuff, that has this tight of integration. And again, I was very apprehensive about using an iPad. Something about it just I don't know, it's not the tactile experience of playing a guitar, playing a keyboard, playing a drum pad, but I find that it is so intuitive, so much easier, but really Logic Remote being a chameleon that can adapt to the context of what you're working on in Logic, I think it's well worth the cost of entry. And I love how this thing works without being connected to the computer directly. I could be not anywhere near my Mac and still be able to interact with the Mac and get set up and start recording. It's fantastic. I hope you can agree that Logic Remote is pretty awesome. It just is that perfect hybrid of being able to affect things within Logic, but more in a control surface sort of way. Being able to play the keys on the iPad itself or drum pads, be able to adjust different loops, etc. And though it's a little different than using an actual keyboard or an actual drum pad, because sometimes you want that tactile experience, I think it's the best compromise for being able to know exactly what you're affecting and being able to dig into Logic from the controller or iPad and not having this weird song and dance with third-party products that you get an OLED screen or you get some sort of indication of what you're affecting on screen, but it just never syncs up quite enough. There's always a song and dance, and it's just like, enough is enough. I just want Logic as a control surface. Let's go. So I hope you found this helpful. If you did, as always, I highly suggest subscribing to the YouTube channel, Why Logic Pro Rules, or subscribing on the website itself, whylogicprorules.com. Every week I'm posting new videos, new emails, and posts to help you get the most you can out of Apple's Logic Pro 10. Thanks so much.